gone through Rattle and put our data into it, and we have trained a model, and we've got the PMML file that encapsulates, that captures the model. And now we want to get ready to put that PMML and data into Camanja so that we can check the results from Camanja against the results from Rattle, which is basically from the R language. So the first thing we need to do is prepare the data and files. And the first thing we need to do there, well, what we'll do first is I guess we'll just check whether Camanja and Zookeeper and Kafka are installed. So we'll go to our root directory in our user account, and we'll take a look at our bash RC, I believe it's called. Bash profile. Look at that, and we see that we have the symbols for Kafka home, Zookeeper home, and Camanja home all defined. So now let's test that not only are they in that file, but they're actually active in the system. So we'll just do a copy. Let's see. What we'll do is we will source them. Just to make sure. So, okay, so now they should all be defined. Okay, so Camanja is defined, and we'll trust that the rest are defined here. Okay, so next thing we want to do is add a key field. In other words, here's what the data looks like right now, the data that we actually fed into Rattle. We've got these fields of data, columns of data. We have headers on those columns. And what we're going to do is we're going to add another field here on the left that will be a key field. It will have the row numbers on it. And this is something that Camanja needs, depending on how it's configured. But looking at the default, pretty much the default configuration, we will add that column. You can add this information in Excel or some other method if you'd like. I'm going to actually use R, or RStudio. Again, all this is in the document. In fact, there's a set of code for R in the document that we can just copy and paste into RStudio, sort of. And so what we're going to do is do it kind of carefully. Let's open up R or RStudio. For me, I prefer using RStudio. And I'm going to get that information, that the text from the document, but first I'm going to open up an R script window as if we're doing a new R script. And that will allow us to look at these commands and execute them one by one. Command C. Okay, and then we'll go R. Okay. Okay, so we'll start executing these one by one. Again, you want to set it to the directory where you have your own uh, files, data files and whatnot. So, okay, this is what our data looks like right now. We do not have the row number column. This is just something that RStudio shows us, but we don't have one as part of the data. So we'll use the write.csv command, and what we'll do is we'll write out row names equal true, which will put those numbers out in front of each row. Now, let's take a look at it on disk here and see what that file looks like now. And we see a couple of things here. First of all, we have added another column. It has an empty column heading. We want to change that. And all of the numbers here are actually enclosed in quotes. So they're not actually numbers. They're actually strings. So we need to change that. Okay. So we want to get to that data file that we just wrote out that has that new column in it. So we'll read that in, take a look at it, and we see we have this new column. It's got a undesirable heading there. We'll make it more useful. And it looks like numbers, but we know from looking at the disk that they're really strings. Okay, so we'll go here, we'll change those strings into numbers. We will take the column names and we'll throw away the first one and take the rest of the column names. We'll start with column name 2. But ahead of that, we'll put this column name record ID. So now if we look at that, now we see that we have a column name of record ID, and in a moment it'll become clear that we have numbers. We'll write that out to the disk now that we've changed them into numbers instead of strings. Go back here and look at the file, and we see that we have our new column heading of record ID, and we have actual numbers here not enclosed in quote marks. Actually, we're not quite done yet. If we go back and look at the file, we see that there's another column that has numbers surrounded by quotes. So they're actually being treated as strings. And it turns out that this is the horsepower column. Now, in our document, we have some more lines of R that will help us to change this column back into, actually into numbers. And it'll talk about the reason why they are numbers, which is that there are some non-numeric values, some string values that were in there in the beginning. And so um, the system has converted all of the things in that column into strings, since it found out that there were some strings somewhere in the column. Okay, so if we go back to R and we start executing these strings, which I just copied over from the document. So we're going to, and you can read the comments about this, but basically what we're doing is we're going to convert all the values that we can into numbers, but we get a warning message that doesn't stop us any, telling us that some NAs, which is a special value in R, meaning that there was no data there. Okay, so now we're going to find the mean of all the data in that column that was not NAs, that was real values. And then we're going to select all the values that were NAs and we're going to replace them with this mean value. And then we're going to write that out to disk. And if we take another look, remember we have some strings in this column, and now we don't. We have numbers in the column instead of strings in our horsepower column. So now we have the record ID in the file. The first column of the each record of the file has the record ID number in it as a number, not a string, and it has the column heading record ID. So now we will copy the file to the correct area of the Camanja directories. And next we're going to go and set the definition of the structure of the messages so that Camanja knows what that record looks like. And the name of the file is autompg.json, and it's actually defined in one of the appendices of this document. And I have already cut and pasted that, or copy and pasted that onto the file autompg.json, and so we're going to go and put that into, again, the correct area of the Camanja directories. And we'll take a look at it as well. And you'll see a couple of interesting things here. Well, each field is represented, and it has a name and a type. System.int for integers, .double for bigger numbers, .string, things like that. And there are some field names that you cannot use that are shown to us in the Advanced Developers Guide. There are some that you might trip over, things like type or class or yield, as in crop yield, and a bunch of others. So you should look at that advanced guide before actually creating one of these yourself. Another thing I want to point out here is the namespace and name fields that we'll be using again in a minute. So these are sort of an identifier of the message type, and they will distinguish it from other message types. And so in production, this combination should be different for every message that you're loading in if you're going to be doing lots of different message types. And if we look right at the end of this, we'll see that our record ID is the partition key that will be used for partitioning the database during processing. Okay, now about the namespace and the name again. So what we need to do here to save us from having extra text in the message, normally what we would do is we would put this entire text, not the words namespace and name, but the rest of it, into the message as a first column, even before the record ID column. And if you look at the quick start sample data files, you will see this kind of structure. But rather than add that to every message, what we're going to do is we're going to modify the cluster config.json file to let us avoid doing that. And what we'll do is we'll basically make it this type a default for Camanja, so that it will assume that is the type of the message. So first thing we do is a pwd, print working directory. So that'll remind us where we've been working so that we can get back to that in a minute. Then we went to the Command config directory, and now we're making a copy of this file before we modify it. And as it happens, I've already done that, so it's giving us a little warning saying, do you really want to overwrite that? And so I'm going to say, no, I don't want to overwrite that, because I already did that good thing of saving the original to a different file. But what we're going to do is we're going to find this, the first adapter in that file, and we're going to find this field underneath that adapter structure, and we're going to put in this file, this line, which tells Camanja which message identifier identifies the kind of the default message identifier. So I will use my favorite editor. You can use yours, doesn't matter. And we'll go down and search for that type string. And you'll see that it's right under the start of the appenders. And in fact, the very first appender has a type of input. In other words, the type of it is input. And I've already added that that line to that appender. So that one is ready to go. And lastly, we want to go back to the directory we were working in, and we want to copy the PMML file that we had created with Rattle, and copy that into the correct subdirectory in the Camanja directory tree. Okay, remember it's a PMML file, but PMML is a type of XML. All right, so then the next thing we'll be doing is going on to running Camanja in just a moment.